Folks, if you're just joining us, we're speaking with Mark Sinnett, and Mark Sinnett is the author of this great book, which we're going to be talking about this afternoon, called The Carnivores. And just let me read a little bit off the front. In October 1954, just as Ray and Mary Town seemed to be establishing the perfect marriage, Hurricane Hazel, yeah, that's right, barrels through Toronto, killing 81 people. Ray is a young cop. He's hailed as a hero by the newspapers for saving several lives from a rampant Humber River. We're going to get into that tonight, folks. While Mary is a nurse who performs her own small miracles that night. And I'm going to let it go right there because I don't want to give too much of this story away. Just let me tell you this, folks. This book is a roller coaster ride and a half with a wonderful, wonderful, huge surprise at the end, and I'm not going to give that away. For that, you're going to have to read the book, and trust me, you're going to want to read this book. Not only is it based on an historical Canadian tragedy, but it is intertwined very well by Mark's writing with the story of a young couple that are struggling to keep their marriage together. I want to welcome Mark to the show for the very first time.
Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, my friend, for joining us. Now, this isn't your first book. How many books have you got out?
This is the fifth book, I think. A couple of books of poetry, book of short stories. I had another novel, a thriller, come out about 5-6 years ago.
Wow.
And then this one was out fall of last year. No, in the last 18 months anyway.
Now, you're an award-winning writer. You've won awards.
Yeah, I did well with this one. This one won the Toronto Book Award last fall.
That's great,
yeah.
And as well it should have. Can you tell the folks a little bit, well, let me just start off with this. You know, one of the things I liked from it, folks, is it deals with two relationships, one relationship, I should say, two people in that relationship, Ray and Mary on the other hand. And what Mark has instinctively done, and this is amazing, is he gives Ray's perspective of an event, and then the very next chapter, he goes to Mary, and then the very next chapter back to Ray, all the way through the book. So you get the two perspectives from the two halves of the relationship. That was a stroke of genius, I felt. What made you go in that direction?
Well, I think with each book you write, you try to set yourself challenges, and one of the challenges I wanted to set myself with this book was to see whether I could convince the reader that these characters were alive. First of all, to see whether I could convince you that two characters could sort of hold equal sway in a novel. Mm-hmm. If I leave you cold to one of those characters, then half the novel is going to leave you cold, and I failed. And so that was a challenge. It's a woman's voice. I wanted to see if I could work with that as well. There was
I want to talk to you about that after.
Yeah.
Please do continue.
And also, it must be 10-15 years ago now, a British writer, Julian Barnes, mm-hmm. wrote a novel called Talking It Over, all set in the present tense, or present times, a man and a woman sort of the death throes of their marriage. And so they would tell alternate versions of the same story, and you had to decide where the truth actually sits. And marvelous book. He followed it up with a sequel, but I hadn't seen the technique used very much apart from that. Mm-hmm. And I thought I would like to try something similar, but also graft onto it a historical event.
An historical event.
Yeah.
Now, what caused you to go to the historical event?
Well, this one in particular, I was actually planning to write a novel about a flood in Devon. Around the same time, 1952 rather than 54, there was a river, the river the Lynmouth, that divided above a small town in Britain. And during a massive storm, that river didn't divide anymore. It came down, washed right through the town, wiped out most of the village. Prince Philip, the Queen Elizabeth had just come, the second had just come to the throne, and Prince Philip visited and rode up and down the cable car. The visuals that I'd seen were very similar to the visuals from this hurricane. And I thought I'd write that story, but it's a very small, very local story, and I also tend these days, or I thought I did, to sort of become too nostalgic. I still, might get my news from the BBC, and I watch the soccer every Saturday, and I thought, that's where I grew up, that's where I was 16, it's not where I am now in my mid-40s. Perhaps it's time to start looking and trying to understand the country where I live now. So I was living in Toronto at the time.
I'm going to make a joke there. Good luck trying to understand Canada. I often ask people, what caused my grandfather to come to Canada? Let me think now. California, Canada, snow, sun, it's...
Well, we ended up here quite by accident. My dad was trying to find a job in the States. He was a tool and die maker in England, and quite, out of the blue, someone offered him a job in Mississauga one day. And one foggy April morning, I wake up surrounded by big cars and pancakes and Ramada Inns and so on. So, but I thought it was time to come to terms with that world. So, came across the story of Hurricane Hazel. The visuals were the same. The drama, I thought I could wrestle from that situation, was similar. I'm in Toronto, in a city of a couple of million people, and I thought, well, there's an audience for the book too. So there was a slightly mercenary aspect, I suppose, to the switch, but also an attempt to understand where I live now. And
what I like about it too is you exquisitely use the storm and the Humber River itself as a metaphor, almost as a channel that guides you through the book, weaving in and out. As the storm grows, of course, the relationship becomes all that much more stormy, and I use that pun fully extended. Is that one of the reasons why you chose this tragedy, the hurricane, as well as the backdrop?
Yeah, absolutely. You hit the nail on the head. This is the metaphor. This is a storm that blows into their marriage, and it makes it through Toronto in about 16 hours. But it takes 50 years for the winds to blow themselves out in that marriage as a result of that storm. I mean, as you know, there are things that happen there that have repercussions. There are waves that that move outwards from that night and carry him right through to his deathbed 50 years later. So, yeah, it's a transparent metaphor, but one that I think works.
Oh, it works very, very well.
Yeah.
There was a point, actually, I was joking when we were speaking a few weeks ago that I said I was going to go out and buy an umbrella. And then I was going to go buy some rubbers afterwards, and we'll let that metaphor go for now, too. Folks, we're speaking with Mark Sinnett. We're talking about his book, The Carnivores. Easy way to get it, as always, www.brenthollandshow.com, www.brenthollandshow.com. Once you're there, just click on the book cover. As always, we'll take you right to a place online where you can order it from the comfort of your own armchair. Let's go back into this great story. As I said, folks, it's a roller coaster ride between a couple, and the two people in that. They're snugly tied together in the beginning, and then they start to come apart. This marriage. There's all kinds of little twists and turns in it that you're going to love, and as I said before, there's that huge surprise at the end, which you're going to want to read this book for. That is the main hook, and trust me, you will not put this book down. I think I read it in 2 or 3 nights. It was just an incredible ride. The characters, we had touched on this before. I said I was going to come back to this. You oscillate between Ray, a full description of Ray, and also his story in one chapter. Then you flip to Mary in the next chapter, his wife, and then back to Ray. So all the way through, as I said, we go from perspective to perspective. How did you ever manage to get into a female character the way you did with Mary? You're obviously a male. Was that a challenge for you?
Probably less than you would imagine. I think that what I would try to do, when I was writing this book, I would write for 5-6 hours a day, and that was normally enough for me to draft one of those sections, or 2 days would be enough to draft one section. So I'd normally sit down in the morning, and I wouldn't try and switch halfway through a session from one character to the other, but I would sit there, and it's not hard to imagine if you're in a relationship what your partner is thinking, whatever their gender is. I mean, whether your partner's a male or a female, I think if you do something, you know damn well what they're probably thinking about that, and how much they believe you, and how plausible you've been. And so I think
how much you can get away with.
How much you can get away with. And I mean, well, that's what Ray's up to. So I think it's not that hard actually to sit down in the morning, and what I would try to do, rather than thinking, well, I'm a woman writing from a woman's perspective. Now, I didn't do that at all. What I would think was, what the hell did Ray do yesterday? What is it? What's he claiming to have done? Not that she's necessarily read or heard him say the things from the previous chapter, but normally those chapters are arranged in a roughly chronological order, and so she can say, look, he says he did this yesterday. Do I buy that? What do I think about this? Mm-hmm. And then I just let her speak. I'm just trying to get inside another human's head. That's what I'm trying to do. It's not that it's a woman's head or a guy's head, I think.
Did you ever stop yourself, though, Mark, and say, this isn't really what the female character would say. This is more what Ray would say. Did you ever catch yourself in those moments?
Yeah, you do. You do. You know, you don't want the voice to become the voices to become too similar. But on the flip side of that, these people have lived together for 50 years. They're recollecting the events of 50 years. You know, we come to resemble our pets, right? I mean, and husbands and wives, I think, come to speak with the same mannerisms, and you can't shy away from that. If I shy away from that, then I think I've not been true to the way people do develop in a long-term relationship. But I also realize that if I do have them using the same mannerisms or the same metaphors or having the same facility for poetry, I'm not doing them the service. You run the risk of critics saying, look at this, there's no differentiation between these two voices. But you know, at some point you have to say to hell with them. That's how I think these people would develop after 50 years together.
Mark Sinnett is our guest this afternoon, folks, tonight, whenever you're watching, listening. And his book is called The Carnivores. Easy way to get it, www.brenthollandshow.com. Just click on the book cover. As always, we'll take you right to a place where you can order the book online. We're talking about his book this afternoon, and his award winner, of course, and its background is set in Toronto, 1954, during Hurricane Hazel, with a wonderful surprise. I'm going to come back to that all the time, but I'm not going to give it away. You're going to have to get the book for that, and trust me, you're going to want to read this book just for that surprise. That's the main hook in the book. The hook in the book. Let's talk some more about that dynamic between the two. Now, I don't want to give too much away, but Ray is not, even though he's a police officer, you've set him up for that, and I want to ask you about that as well. Why he's a police officer? He's not quite the most upstanding partner a woman would pick. How's that? Is that a way to skirt around without giving too much away?
Well, I think both these people are consumed with the ideas of duty. I mean, this is set in the 1950s, right? And Mary is a nurse. Her job, her place in the world, as she sees it, is to sort of is to protect human life and to cure sickness wherever she sees it. And so she does many of the unsung heroics during the hurricane. Whereas Ray, he's a cop. He's out there. He's the Superman-ish figure for those couple of days and gets all the publicity. So there's an injustice being. This is all about justice and injustice. There's an injustice in the way that her actions are perceived. But it's also important to realize that she never manages to leave Ray, and she feels that those oaths that she took as a nurse come back in a sense to haunt her 50 years later when Ray gets sick, and she has that duty to him again to nurse him through his sickness. She never escapes the sort of the role she's made for herself as a young adult in 1954. Ray, he's a more complicated. Well, he's not more complicated, but he's bound to uphold the law, and he has a damn hard time doing that, doesn't he? It's and does he really want to be the carnivore of the title? Does he want to be the bad guy in this? I think probably not. It's probably, rather than the career he's chosen, it's the genes inside Ray that control his actions, whereas for Mary it's the career she chose, I think.
Now, 1954, obviously you gravitated to that because that was the date of the hurricane, but also people were different back then. There was more of a distinct role for a woman to follow and a man to follow. Not only that, 1954, there's a homosexual component in it, folks. People just didn't come out in 1954. I mean, people just didn't come out, quote unquote, until about 10 years ago. We're in 2011 right now. I would say, 10, 15 years ago. And even now, to this day, folks, people are shy to come out and talk about their own sexuality, irregardless that here in Canada, we have gay marriage. It's still this taboo subject. Can we talk a little bit about why you chose to have their daughter being homosexual?
Well, there's no reason why she shouldn't be. You know, when you're trying to create a character, and you have to bring, their daughter has an important role to play because she's a confidant of Mary's. She spends much of the novel abroad. She's an aid worker. She's not in the city very often. There are ways in which Mary is able to relate to her daughter that Ray can't. As I say, Mary and her daughter share confidences. Ray and his daughter find them. There's an impasse. I don't know if that has much to do with her sexuality at all. I think mostly it was just that she could have been. You know, there's a percentage of the population that is straight. There's another percentage that's gay. She happens to be gay, and I wanted it to be largely as incidental as that. I do think it creates a distance between Ray, who has a more prehistoric sort of view of the world than Mary does, and maybe that's where you were going after a little bit.
Absolutely.
It's another hurdle for him to have to deal with. I mean, his daughter, to her great credit, seems largely immune to his sort of prejudices. She manages. She has every sympathy for her mother, but she does manage to sort of tread a fine line through that minefield that their marriage has become, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And folks, that's just another one of the twists and turns in this great story. This novel by Mark Sinnett. The book's called The Carnivore, and you can pick it up at www.brenthollandshow.com. Just click on the book cover. Mark, let's go back into how you build characters. How do you start off creating a character?
I think what I have is the gist of an idea. You know, as I say, I thought I was going to write about a historical disaster in the 50s in England. That changed to Canada, so I needed young Canadian people. Probably Ray was going to be an immigrant to Canada. He was probably going to be of British stock. All of those things are true. They're not explicitly stated, I don't think, in the book. And then you're looking for voice. I think I started by sketching out ways that Ray might feel about his work. He was also a participant in the Second World War, so I'd have almost diary entries written for Ray, and I'd start trying to flesh out his character that way. For Mary, I met with some retired nurses here in Kingston who'd worked during that period. They were through the museum here of healthcare here. Mm-hmm. And they met with me. They would give me they would tell me about how they had to wear enormously uncomfortable shoes, and they talked to me about the dresses. They talked about the sort of the attitudes on the ward with the smoking and the not smoking, and how they would feel about those things. And watching them talk, that's where the characters come from. You can see those little flashes, those little moments in them where what they felt 50 years ago is still alive in them, right?
And that's where the magic is in this book, folks, is in those details, because what it manages to do, the characters in this book are not just cardboard cutouts. They are real, they are three-dimensional, and they have all those little elements, like smoking bugs you or something like that. It's a wonderful, masterful little ride that you're going to go on, trust me. And with that surprise at the end, you're going to want to get the book. The book, of course, is called The Carnivores, www.brenthollandshow.com. How much of yourself, every writer that I know puts a little bit of themselves into the character. I don't know if that's true for you. I shouldn't say every writer I know, but I was going to ask you, how much of yourself did you put in, not Ray, but Mary?
Well, I'm glad you said that, because anything of me that's in that book comes out through all of the characters, particularly Ray and Mary, but the daughter. I mean, reaction to circumstances, the reaction to storm, tragedy, a pizza appearing on the table in front of you. I mean, how I react is I am going to rely on those experiences when I write them from the character's point of view as well. But I looked at lots of troubled relationships. My relationship hasn't always been perfect. It's fantastic now, but it hasn't always been perfect. So you know the silences and the looks and the glances and the long depressive periods that can enter into a relationship. I've seen it, I've seen it in relatives. I've seen it, periods a long time ago in my parents who were still happily together. But so you do draw on experience. You draw on experience to sort of create the shape of a relationship, or even the shape of a scene. The shape of a moment can be made out of a memory I have. But as far as putting these concrete little clues to who I am, then those aren't in there. I mean, I've done that before. I've had you live out sort of these vicarious experiences. In my other novel, I had a British football-loving hoodlum / assassin, and I can live out lots of little fantasies through those sorts of characters. Not so much here, which was a much more serious look.
Did you draw on people as people make composite characters sometimes, which is a little bit of this person, a little bit of that person? Are there elements in there of real life people that you know?
No, not that I know. No, there are. I did read a biography of a cop in Toronto at that time, and his career and so there's a little bit of him in there. I never met him. I never talked to his family. There was a good biography written of him that's credited in the acknowledgements to the book. So there's a piece of him in there. These nurses, as I said, that were lovely and talked to me at some length about their experiences. There's bits of them. There's some scenes on the wards there where we're giving an inventory of injuries, and not necessarily from the hurricane, but people suffering from tuberculosis, and guys smoking in the beds and things. And so those nurses on that day in that scene were based, I think, in part on the women I met. But no, I'm not one of those composite.
Okay.
I'm not one of those composite guys. Yeah.
No, I understand that completely.
Yeah.
Folks, we're speaking with Mark Sinnett this afternoon. We're talking about his book, The Carnivores. www.brenthollandshow.com. It is a wonderful story. You're going to be engaged in this story in many ways. There's many little interwoven stories that come together and they spread around. It is in the backdrop of Hurricane Hazel, which took place in 1954. And you're going to find that the storm, as it grows and explodes, so therefore does the story, with a wonderful, wonderful surprise at the end. I'm going to leave you hanging on that because it is such a great surprise. You're going to want to get the book, of course, www.brenthollandshow.com. Let's talk about what it's like to be a Canadian writer. You've won awards. You've got 5 books out, and all outstanding. If they're all like this, the writing is top-notch. What is the struggle like for a Canadian artist, for a Canadian writer here in this country?
Well, there aren't very many Canadian writers who just manage to write. I think that's, without us having the time to go into very much depth about the writer's plight, the economic barriers to being a full-time writer in Canada are absolutely enormous, right? I mean, The Carnivore has done reasonably well. I mean, as I say, it won a good award. I got an advance for it. I was asked to write the book based on an idea. And yet, as you know, I sell real estate for a living now, and then I try to carve out moments to write because it's impossible for me to do that as a full-time career. My last book, this sounds self-serving, but only to illustrate the point, it sold in 3 countries. It was translated into in France and in Germany, and it came out in multiple editions, and it took me 5 years to write, and if I worked that out on an hourly basis, I would have been better off working in the service industry. I'd have made a lot more money. I'd have had a happier partner probably. I'd have been a miserable guy. But writing,
I hear you, buddy.
yeah.
Yeah.
But writing can make you miserable as well because the rewards aren't there. And you know what the problem is? That I spoke to a friend a couple of days ago, and she just got a good Canada Council grant, or an Ontario Council grant, I think, for about $12,000, which is, you think that's a lot of money, and someone's just hidden away writing a book. But that's a book that's been gestating for years inside her. She's suddenly got, 4 or 5 months where she gets to concentrate on that book. If her employers are nice enough to let her have the time to do it, then she's got to get back. And you know what? When you write that book and it finally comes out, all it takes is 2 lines in the first review. The Border Guards, the last one, got a cruel review in the Globe and Mail, and which I could go on about at length, but obviously should. That essentially can kill a book. Your publicity budget is slashed. The paperback rights maybe aren't exercised. You can spend 10 years writing a book, and it can be killed one Saturday morning about 9:30 over a coffee and a Danish. So it's a roller coaster where you're down and you're working for an awful long time. You surface at the publication of that book, and not only are you broken hoping for good sales, but you're entirely reliant on the voice of often of someone who's spent 3 or 4 hours with your book and has the power to kill it or make it. And that's not the way it should be. And we have a government now that's really not supportive of the arts in any serious way.
Yeah.
And so as I say, I pay my bills selling real estate, and I don't see anything in government policy that makes me think that there'll ever be a way to actually stop and for me to write books, or for all the massively talented young people coming up writing books. How in the world they're supposed to actually, what encouragement we're giving them is a bit of a mystery to me.
I agree wholeheartedly with you. It seems that ideas are the ones that are suffering these days. Original ideas. We're not supporting ideas this country at all. And I don't want to get on a little bit of a soapbox, but just to let you know, folks, that I think we put more money into manufacturing and industry than the ideas that create those jobs in the first place. And I think that is a huge tragedy. The future for Mark Sinnett, what's next?
Well, I'll sell a few more houses, and that will give me time. I actually have two books that I'm debating between, or I think that debate's mostly over. One was going to be a historical novel about a young girl who was on whaling ships in the 19th century on Martha's Vineyard. I might have mentioned this to you.
You see, no, actually you didn't, but I'm intrigued already.
Yeah, see, and so we're lucky enough. My partner's aunt has a little place on Martha's Vineyard, and so we've gone there every summer for the last couple of years. I read about this girl who was on the whaling ships. I imagine a novel where she is orphaned, storm at sea. She's the only survivor, and she's actually shipped to Bloomfield County, to Prince Edward County here, and raised by spiritualists, because that was the seat of spiritualism in the 19th century.
I didn't know that. You've just educated me.
So you've got Prince Edward County, a superficial sort of geographical similarity to Martha's Vineyard.
Yeah.
And if she's raised by spiritualists, you've got the visions. My grandparents used to be spiritualists, and so you go to those services. They summon, they talk to the dead.
Oh, absolutely.
And so I envision this mix of Moby Dick and ghost story. So which I think would be great. I'd love to write that book.
Yeah.
I mean, my grandfather used to speak in tongues. He claimed to have a German minister that would speak through him, and it was fascinating, frightening stuff. As a young boy, and suddenly he would seem to be in a trance and would speak in tongues and completely believe that's what was happening. He didn't think he was scaring the living daylights out of his grandson. So anyway, I picture this girl in the 19th century raised on the edges of Lake Ontario instead of on the edges of the Atlantic, and I think there'd be a lot of. There's a great story in there, I think.
Absolutely.
But I'd have to spend a year researching it. I don't have a year to research it, I have the windows for me are so small. So the other way to go is to write a novel about a middle-aged real estate agent, right? Mm-hmm. And write what you know. And at the moment, that's what I know. So I have a black comedy, I think, in me about that business, and I might have to wait until I retire before I publish it. But yeah, that's what's next, I think.
Folks, we're speaking with Mark Sinnett this afternoon. We're talking about his book, The Carnivores, and there's a wonderful surprise at the end of this book, which you're going to want to read about. Easy way to get the book, www.brenthollandshow.com. Mark, we're going to have to start to wrap up now, but I'm going to ask you a question I virtually ask every guest that comes on this show. That question is, this show is broadcast through the university system, so you've got a direct venue right through to all the students across Canada right now. What would you say to them?
Well, if they want to write, I believe the key. People ask me regularly, how do I get better? The answer is in the editing. I mean, you were talking about editing your show, and for me, the glorious part of writing is actually the editing. Most of my first drafts are awful. I'm the first to admit, when I actually started to write prose seriously, I remember I'd sit in a park for hours in Kingston in the summers, and I'd try to write, and it was rubbish, terrible stuff. It's not until the 5th, 6th, 7th draft that I actually start to see with some clarity what it is I was getting at, or I find another way into the prose. It's all about whittling away. What you write to start with won't be any good. I mean, I've heard that Stephen King can write his novels and write good novels, and basically not edit them. There are incredibly few people who can do that. What you need is to edit, and then you need to find someone perhaps who can have a look at them with some objectivity. Most readers, even I give my stuff to, they come at it with a motive. They want somehow to leave their imprint on my stuff, and I can sense that in the feedback I'm getting. You need someone without some need to be important in your writing life. Get an objective person to respond to you and edit life into. I was going to say edit the life out of your work, but that would be wrong. Edit life into your work, and then know when to stop. Yeah.
And know when to stop. Folks, we've been speaking with Mark Sinnett. Mark Sinnett's the author of this book right here, The Carnivores. I want to thank you all for listening and watching. You could reach Mark through my website, which is www.brenthollandshow.com. Just click on that book cover. It'll take you right to a place where you can get the book online. I'm Brent Holland. Thank you for listening. See you next time.